There are 17 players from the 2022 Vikings roster that are scheduled to hit free agency, and I think we can come to pretty easy decisions about what to do with all of them. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. You can also find the show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is presented to you by Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on entry. First-time users get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com. Promo code Locked On. Today on the show is UFA Day, and not just UFA, all the pending free agents for the Vikings. We do this one every year. Who is leaving and what should we do with them? There's the question for you. There are 17 players total, including some of the restricted and exclusive rights free agent types. I will explain to you the difference between all those things as well and how all that stuff works. But we can start with the easier, simpler situations, which are the unrestricted free agents, guys that are just going to leave if we don't do anything about it. But the Vikings can, at any moment, they could do it tomorrow if they got the deal done, decide to bring back any of these players for another year if they agreed to it. So among those names, guys like Garrett Bradbury, Chandon Sullivan, Alexander Madison, BC Johnson, Austin Schlottman, Duke Shelley, of course, a whole bunch of them. So I'm just going to go down this list. I'm working off the list from overthecap.com. And the first one on it is maybe the most interesting, Garrett Bradbury, who I think I might stick to my guns here on what I said about Bradbury since his rookie year, which was, all right, he'll play out his 4 years and walk. Well, he has played out his 4 years of his rookie deal. He did not get a fifth-year option. Now, fifth-year option for a center is pretty insane because I'm pretty sure that the fifth-year option treats centers like every offensive lineman. And for those who don't know how the fifth-year option works, it is similar to the franchise tag where the actual amount of fifth-year option costs is sort of based on the contracts that people of your position are earning. So the franchise tag is the top 5. If we franchise tagged Justin Jefferson, he would make the average of the top 5 wide receiver contracts. That's why franchise tags are so expensive. They're a top 5 deal. For the fifth-year option, it's the average of the 3rd highest to the 25th highest salaries. So it's a smaller deal. But when you add tackle salaries in there for a center, you don't want to pay tackle money to a center. So he was never going to get that fifth-year option unless he was a total stud superstar. So I don't know if that's as meaningful for projecting out the Vikings' opinion of Garrett Bradbury, but I'm not here to try to predict what the Vikings will do. I'm here to tell you what I think I would do. And I would let Garrett Bradbury walk and hit free agency. Now, I have been the biggest Bradbury defender in the world here. However, I've the pendulum has swung back the other way beyond me. And I feel like people have begun to overrate Bradbury because his PFF grades were good, but I don't think anything about him fundamentally changed this season. I think he's just been hidden a little better, been asked to do less. And there's potentially an indictment on all of the other coaching staffs under Zimmer is that they asked Garrett Bradbury to do too much. He really had the world on his shoulders in the run game and a lot of times in pass protection. He had to deal with one-on-ones a lot. He had to deal with solo reach blocks with no help a lot. He did a lot of stuff that caused him to fail a lot, and it was, more difficult assignments, and I don't think PFF adjusted for that as much as I would. And that's why I sort of defended him, but now his job has gotten a lot easier. And again, I don't think PFF has adjusted for that enough. And so I see the same guy that can sort of be a B+ player, but never be an A player. For a center, I don't want to give second contract money to him. And the contract that he would command, I think, is probably more than most of you would be willing to pay for Garrett Bradbury. I don't think you get him on a 1 year like 5 million sal. Like, I don't think that that's feasible. I think you need to give him a real contract, and I think somebody on the market will. I don't think that it's necessary for the Vikings to do it, but maybe somebody will. And so I think it's best for both parties if Garrett Bradbury just hits free agency. And because of the order of operations here, you essentially have to give Garrett Bradbury a second deal if you're going to sign him without him testing the market. Once he is out there on the market, like you're not going to bring him back. We might end up in a world where Garrett Bradbury comes back on a 1 year cheap deal because nobody else wanted him, right? Like maybe the market just turns that way. But for that to happen, he has to get on the market. And once he's on the market, once he has left, bringing him back, it's like, well, you might as well look at who else is on the market now. And while that's not a group of people that is like incredibly exciting, guys like Ethan Posick, Austin Blythe, Connor McGovern, Jake Brendel, the 49ers center. I don't know. None of those names like leap out to me, but neither does Garrett Bradbury's. So I don't know. At that point, then you're just kind of looking for the best deal, and there's no guarantee that Garrett Bradbury is it. So I'm letting Garrett Bradbury walk, but let me know what you would want to do. Next up is Chandon Sullivan. Yeah, I don't think he should be on this defense anymore. He's a pretty easy let walk for me. I don't want to speculate too hard because I don't know the coverages and I don't know what the rules were supposed to be when it comes to busted coverages. It's really hard to look, because somebody screwed up. So if, two people are playing this and two people are playing that, I don't know which two of them are wrong. But it kind of felt like Chandon Sullivan was in a lot of those. So either he was the most let down by his teammates guy in the entire world, or he screwed up a whole bunch of coverages. When it came to actually like manning up and having to play against somebody just like purely, he didn't do the worst. He got beat on the inside a lot. But if some of that is, relying on help that wasn't going to be there. And again, it's kind of hard to tell, like, was the help supposed to be there or was he supposed to carry it a little bit further inside or whatever? Kind of hard to know, like, where the landmarks and coaching points are. But even after giving him credit for all of that, there's just too many screw ups. And the way that nickel corners are on this market in the NFL, you can get the best nickel corner in the league for like $9 million. It's amazing how much nickel corners are undervalued on the market. It's criminal. But if I were running a team, I would go get the most expensive, or whoever I thought was the best nickel corner. I would get the best guy, no matter what he cost, because he's still probably going to be underpaid. I think that the Vikings can do better than Chandon Sullivan on the open market. And I have no qualms with letting Sullivan walk and saying, thank you for your service. And hey, he's 27. He's got a long career ahead of him too. Next up is a very interesting one in Irv Smith. Probably letting him walk. And you're going to notice a theme here that I'm letting a lot of these guys walk. I don't see a huge need to bring back a whole lot of these guys. I mean, for the Vikings with Irv Smith, they traded for TJ Hawkinson. That pretty much spelled the end. And Irv Smith is... I think he should get a chance to be a starter somewhere. Obviously, the injuries have sort of hampered things, but he's going to be one of those guys where if he can have a healthy season, let's see what that turns into, right? And I think he deserves the chance to try that. And I think somebody should give him a deal. Maybe there's incentives in it. Maybe there's provisions in it. But those incentives are probably playtime, receptions, games played, stuff like that, snaps played. And if he's taking a deal like that in Minnesota, he's going to have to deal with TJ Hawkinson being in front of him, and that's just going to make it that much harder for him to hit those things. So again, I think the best thing for both Irv Smith and for the Vikings is for Irv Smith to hit free agency, and I think Irv Smith can get more money from the market than he can from the Vikings. And I think that's kind of the way it is for Bradbury as well, not so much Chandon Sullivan, but all of these guys. It's not necessarily, I hate these guys and I want to see the back of them, but I think it's just more, feels like the Vikings can do better than this, efficiency-wise. Get a better player for, get more bang for their buck, I guess, by hitting the open market. And that's what we're after here. I have 14 more players to go through. So make sure you stick with me as I do that. But first, it is Super Bowl week and a half, which is betting Christmas. It is the season of gambling, and FanDuel is the place to do it. I love having little pools and little boxes and stuff with my Super Bowl parties, and I'll be using FanDuel for all of those lines and odds. And if you want to get in on the action, you can go ahead to America's #1 sportsbook, which we are very excited to partner with at Locked On. And if you are new to FanDuel, it's even better because you can download FanDuel and bet Super Bowl 57 with what's called a no sweat first bet. You get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line sports bet to point spreads to who will score a touchdown, a first touchdown scorer, anytime touchdowns, parlay it all together, do all the crazy stuff you want. I love the Super Bowl bets. We'll probably even do like a full segment on them when we get closer to the Super Bowl, because why not? You can do all of that stuff at FanDuel. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and easy to use. And best of all, you get paid your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft. We have so many people down there in Mobile, Alabama, covering that thing daily with live post-practice recaps on the Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page, or they also upload the podcast there if you'd rather just listen. So go check all of that stuff out. Moving on with this UFA recap, we're getting into some of the smaller players here with, not physically smaller, because the next guy is Jonathan Bullard, and he's huge. I'm going to put him, I've kind of got 3 buckets here. I got guys I would let walk, guys I would re-sign, and guys I'm just like pretty agnostic about. I would be totally fine to see Jonathan Bullard come back as long as you don't pay him something crazy. But for what he would probably cost, I would be totally fine to see Jonathan Bullard come back. And then if they don't re-sign him and he goes and signs somewhere else, that's also fine. He's a quality player. He's a good rotational defensive lineman, and he's 30. And I think, honestly, you could probably carve out 3-4 more years in the league doing that, even at his position, for as long as his body kind of lets him. He's good enough to. So, sure. But if he's like a penciled in starter, I think you can do better than that. But I don't think he's going to command the money to like put that expectation on himself. So I think he will be a valuable piece wherever he goes. And if that's the Vikings, great. And if not, small potatoes. Also, Oli Udoh goes in a similar bucket to me, but I actually wouldn't mind bringing him back. You're not giving him a second contract or a starter contract, but as a backup tackle, he's all right. I never want him to sniff guard again. That was the problem in 2021. Never, ever, ever put him at guard again. We got enamored by a really good camp that he had, and that was a mistake. We can learn from that. Never again. But at tackle, a lot of those problems went away. And while I still think that he's too far away from being a starting quality tackle to challenge for any jobs or create any redundancies, you could definitely do worse than that at backup. And, that backup swing tackle job is a difficult job. The only problem is Blake Brandel, who is an exclusive rights free agent who is also pending. And an exclusive rights free agent is kind of like a restricted free agent, but you can pay him the minimum. So essentially, Blake Brandel is, the Vikings have right of first refusal for him. They can sign him to a minimum salary deal, and he cannot negotiate with other teams. It's kind of like a restricted free agency tender in that way, which makes Blake Brandel the easiest keep decision in the world. You can offer him a 1-year minimum salary, and he is not allowed to negotiate with other teams. It's for players with less than 3 accrued years, and it applies to Blake Brandel because he got cut his rookie year. He was on the practice squad, which meant that he's no longer on his rookie contract as it is for most 6th-round picks. But that puts Oli Udoh in a weird spot. So I'm going to let Oli Udoh walk. However, if you decide that you would rather keep Oli Udoh in and get rid of Blake Brandel, and let him hit free agency, then I guess you could do that too. I don't really see the point in keeping both, but for me, I'm keeping Brandell. I'm letting Oli Udo walk and wishing him good luck. I think he can be a good swing tackle somewhere. And if you listen to my Patreon video on him, or I think I did a whole episode on him back around the Packers game, the Week 17 Packers game. I think he's like 2 major wrinkles away from actually being a good tackle. There's like 2 things to fix with him. And if he can get better at those 2 things, he has suddenly a lot of athletic potential and ability gets unlocked, and he can actually be a really, really, really good player. But that's a lot to ask. 2 things is by no means an easy mountain to climb. Moving on, Nick Mullins. I am slamming the return button for him. I think he's a very good backup quarterback. He has some juice. I mean, if just looking at him and the games he had in San Francisco. Now, look, we watched everybody be good in San Francisco, right? Kyle Shanahan does that, but Mullins is sort of, he'll make mistakes as a backup, and typically I want someone who's a little more conservative as a backup, just a don't screw it up guy. But Mullins also he's got the gumption to push it. And in a backup situation, you might need that, right? If you're starting a backup quarterback, if Kirk Cousins gets his ankle rolled up and you need Nick Mullins to play a whole game, you might need a guy to push it to, make up the deficit. You'll probably be an underdog in that game. So I don't mind it too much, but he will sort of write checks that his arm can't cash. And that was what led to one of the really bad interceptable passes against Chicago he just couldn't make the throw he thought he was making. And then he actually threw a real interception doing that too. And I think that's kind of who he is. But as a backup package, that's pretty small criticism. So I'm taking that back for sure. Absolutely. Bring Nick Mullins back in, and it'll cost a couple $1 million because backup quarterbacks are worth that, but it's worth it, right? You got to have your insurance policy at the most important position. Next up, Alexander Mattison. I've talked about this a lot. I think he's a really easy decision to let walk. I think he can be a starting caliber running back in this league. The Vikings have Dalvin Cook under contract, and if they cut Dalvin Cook, maybe they bring back Alexander Mattison, but it's the same thing as Bradbury, where to really get Alexander Mattison and not have to pay him like a real boy contract, because I don't think you want to pay Dalvin Cook money to Alexander Mattison, right? The point would be to get cheaper. And to achieve that, I think you have to let him test the market and then hope that the market turns poorly for him and then he wants to come back. So I think that's what you do with Mattison. You let him walk and say, hey, good luck on the market. No hard feelings. We've loved having you. Keep us in mind. We'll be in the negotiations with you. But go test the market. Go talk to other teams. Go do what's right for you. But just know that we're still interested. I think that's the move with Mattison. But I think he can do better with somebody else than he can do here, because of the running back room that we have is just going to be in better shape than the running back room that other teams have. I think the dynamic changes a little bit if you get rid of Dalvin Cook, and that decision will get made before this decision with Mattison. So you'll have more information when you actually have to make the decision, but I struggle to see a world where I'm not really happy to just let Mattison test the open market and hope he gets a huge deal and gets me a comp pick. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 players remaining, but most of them are pretty small deals and easy decisions. So we'll try to rip through them, but foist. Let me talk to you about daily fantasy the way I like to do it. It is prize picks, where you can pick 2 to 6 of your favorite players and win up to 25 times your money on any entry if you are right. Daily fantasy, picking one player and you're not stuck to that player for the whole season or the whole playoffs or whatever, is very fun, but I don't like having to go into crazy pools. I don't like having to play against other players and sharps and guys that, spend their whole weeks researching this stuff. How about just you versus the house? Prize Picks has their projection. Can you correctly predict whether they'll do better or worse than it? That's the whole game, and you string a whole bunch of players together like that and see if you can't win. It is easy to use. It's easy to get set up. They have all kinds of things. Of course, you can do this for the Super Bowl, but you can also do this for basketball games or hockey games or crazy stuff, and they have safe and fast withdrawals as well when you're ready to cash out. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com and sign up to play daily fantasy. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, that means PrizePicks will just give you $100, or put in 50, get 50, slapped right on top. That is if you enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, 9 players left to go. Let's rapid fire through them. They're pretty easy, but the next guy actually is maybe one of the hardest ones, is Duke Shelley. I don't know what Duke Shelley is going to cost, but I want him back. I mean, there's obviously going to be a limit if he starts asking for like a starting caliber contract or something. Then you got to let him walk and see if you can't find that somewhere else. But if you can't find that somewhere else, and then he comes back and says, "Hey, didn't find my contract. Are you still interested?" I'm going, "Heck yeah, dude, get on in here." I love what Duke Shelley did as a backup cornerback, and I think he makes for a very good competition for a youngster, whether that youngster is Andrew Booth or someone we draft this year. Hey, you want to be the starting corner for the Minnesota Vikings? Beat Duke Shelley. I love him as that threshold and that guy that can push people, and he has infinite dog in him, and that's the kind of competitive energy that I think is really good in a training camp situation. And then plus just as a backup corner, that's great. So I think I'm paying him backup corner money, and if he wants to try to do better than that, then good luck. But that offer will just be like on the table, and if you want to pass it up and go search for greener pastures, best of luck and no hard feelings. But I would really hope that Duke Shelley is a Viking in 2023. I think he's earned that. Next up is Austin Schlottmann. Super agnostic about this one. Backup center, can kind of be anyone. I think the Vikings are in a spot where they're maybe going to want to draft a center. It is a very thick class of centers in the like 50 to 150 range, that kind of round 3-ish part. And we'll probably talk about a lot of them on this show eventually. So I do think a young center is going to enter the fold. And if you want that guy to like compete with Schlottmann, I guess you could do that, but I feel like you could probably do better with the center room. So I'm very agnostic. If they bring back Schlottmann on another 1-year deal to be the backup center, sure. And if not, also sure. I will probably not have a very emotional reaction either way. BC Johnson, man, what a bummer of a time he has been with the injuries that he has suffered. I think I also land in an agnostic place with BC Johnson, can kind of take him or leave him. I think he's absolutely worth putting in your camp, whether that's the Vikings or somebody else. I mean, I would not hold these knee injuries against him. I would give him the opportunity to prove that he's over it, right? But again, if somebody else wants to be the one to take that gamble, I'm not going to say that the Vikings made a mistake. Chris Boyd, I would very much like to return. He's a special teams ace, and that is all he ever needs to be for his whole career. And he could probably play till he's 38 if he wanted to, or until he gets slow, I guess. But as a cornerback, the fact that he never saw the field this year, despite the Vikings going all the way as deep on their depth chart as they did, is very concerning in terms of his development as a cornerback. I think he took a step back in that regard this year, but as a special teamer, he's an ace, and that is always worth having on your team. The next one is another exclusive rights free agent. That is Kyrie's Tonga. So slam that one. That's a very easy move. I think Tonga and Brandell may be the first transactions the Vikings make for 2023, just because, I guess not counting futures contracts, just because they're so easy. Offer them the minimum deal and they cannot negotiate with other teams. Fantastic. So that's really easy. We've got a couple of special teamers too. Greg Joseph, I am pretty good to let him walk. Giving him like a long-term deal or whatever, I don't think is the move with him. And I think the Vikings, I mean, he was a bottom 5 kicker this year. And that's even without overreacting to extra points, which are, they're like a lower EPA thing. But even if you treat those as like 33-yard field goals, or even if you get rid of them entirely, there was still enough misses by Greg Joseph. The Vikings can do better there. And I'm absolutely fine to let him walk and go pick off somebody who loses a competition somewhere, or, grab an undrafted free agent. I'm never into drafting them. Conversation for another day. But that doesn't mean I'm not into changing who it is. On the other hand, Andrew DePaula might be the best long snapper in the league. So, I mean, he's 36 years old, so he might retire. But he also spent like 4 years out of football between college and the pros. So he doesn't have the wear and tear of a 36-year-old. He's also a long snapper, so he doesn't get on the field as much. So it's a spry 36. and might legit be the best long snapper in the league. I mean, he made all pro and stuff. But also like PFF has him rated as I think the highest, and somebody at PFF who was like in charge of charting this stuff said that they had 4 slightly inaccurate long snaps on the whole season, which is unreal. That is insane consistency. So yeah, Andrew DePaul, a blank check for a long snapper. I'm in love. Then we got 2 restricted free agents. So restricted free agency is the same thing where the Vikings get to offer a tender, and it's kind of a non-negotiated deal. The price is already set. It's Ben Ellefson and Kenny Willekes. Kenny Willekes hasn't been able to stay healthy, which is unfortunate. And I believe he also missed the cut last year when he was healthy. So I have no real need to tender him. But with Ellefson, I do feel like he's worth an original round tender. So the way that this works is you can do a first round tender, a second round tender, or an original round tender. And those are prefixed amounts. You can Google what they are for this year. I'm not sure what they are for this year, but they're prefixed amounts and they're usually not that big. If another team wants Ben Ellefson, let's say I put a first round tender on him, which would be the most expensive contract. And another team says, nope, I really want Ben Ellefson. I am going to, and he can go negotiate with other teams. And he strikes a deal with, I don't know, the Chicago Bears. And the Bears say, we want Ben Ellefson and we're going to pay him more than that tender would be. And the Vikings can actually match that contract and say, no, we want to keep him. We'll give him that contract. Thanks for negotiating for us. Or they can say, no, we don't want to keep him for that much money. You can have him for that much money, but because we put a first round tender on him, you give us a first round pick for that. That's how restricted free agency works. So you can do that first round or a second round for a lower contract, or original round, which is the round they were drafted in. Ben Ellefson was not drafted, so it means there is no draft pick, and it's really just a sort of first right of refusal thing for the contract. I'm absolutely doing an original round tender on him. And I mean, he's tight end 3, just a blocking guy. He's not a very prolific name, so I don't think you're going to run into too many problems with that. And if you do, you can just match it. That is it. It's everybody. So of these players, I kept in-house Ben Ellefson, Blake Brandel, Andrew DePaola, Kyrie Stonga, Chris Boyd, Duke Shelley, Nick Mullins, and some other guys maybe I was agnostic about, but that's it. And none of those guys are going to really cost any more than anybody else in their roster spot would cost. And some of those guys might not even make the team. So, of course, you got to go through camp and we'll see what those guys make. But I think that's pretty conservative when it comes to some of these leaving unrestricted free agents. And it does leave some holes on the Vikings roster that they will have to handle. And we will see how they do that. We're still on DC watch. We're still on Arizona head coach watch. I kind of thought there would be news today. Maybe there'll be news on Thursday that we can talk about, and we will talk about it tomorrow. I will see you all for that. Check out the Senior Bowl coverage at Locked On NFL Draft. Check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. Big, long salary cap explainer on there. If you ever get confused about ERFAs and about like LTBE incentives and prorated bonus and all of these crazy terms, go check that out. I illustrated it all with beans and then taught you how to cook beans. There you go. Patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.